In the chaos of World War II, millions of soldiers marched onto battlefields, but not all of them returned. Some didn't die, they didn't surrender. They simply vanished. Entire squads disappeared without a single trace. Decorated officers were swallowed by the fog of war, and young men barely out of their teens left home for the front lines and were never seen again. Families waited by doors that never opened, while history searched, but the answers never came. World War II was the largest and deadliest conflict in human history, claiming over 70 million lives. But hidden within those staggering numbers are mysteries far darker than casualty lists, soldiers who vanished without explanation. No bodies were returned. No graves were dug. No final words ever reached their families. Only silence. Were they captured and silenced behind enemy lines? Did some desert and carve out new lives in the shadows? Or were they erased completely by the brutal machinery of war, lost beneath rubble, swallowed by oceans, or buried in forgotten fields? These haunting disappearances still echo through time. In this video, we uncover the chilling stories of WW2 soldiers who stepped onto the battlefield and vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of secrecy, fear, and unanswered questions. Prepare to enter a world where history collides with mystery, and where silence often speaks louder than the guns. When we think about World War II, we usually imagine clear victories, devastating losses, and soldiers returning home to tell their stories. But history is not always so tidy. For many soldiers, their last known moment is recorded in an official document, missing in action. Families received telegrams with those haunting words, and many never saw closure. Some of these men were eventually found decades later, in unmarked graves. Others, however, remain mysteries that continue to puzzle historians. One of the most chilling stories is that of the Lost Battalion of Stalingrad. In the brutal winter of 1942, German forces clashed with the Soviet army in one of the bloodiest battles in human history. Amid the chaos, a unit of over 1,500 German soldiers went missing. Soviet records didn't list them as captured, and German records marked them as missing in action. Eyewitnesses reported seeing them march into the ruins of the city. But not a single man returned. Were they ambushed and wiped out in secret? Did they desert and vanish into the vast Soviet wilderness? The truth remains locked in the ruins of Stalingrad, where bones are still uncovered to this day. Another case comes from the Pacific Theater, where American soldiers vanished on islands swallowed by jungle. One such story is that of Sergeant Raymond Enright, a paratrooper who fought in the Philippines in 1944. His unit was ordered to push through dense forests, where Japanese forces had hidden bunkers and snipers. In the confusion of battle, Enright was seen darting ahead to scout the path. Minutes later, his squad followed, only to find nothing. No signs of a struggle, no traces of blood, no evidence of capture. He was simply gone. To this day, no remains have ever been recovered. Some veterans later swore they saw villagers wearing American gear deep in the jungle. Could Enright have been captured, forced into labor, or even lived out the rest of his life in hiding? Europe too is filled with mysteries of vanished soldiers. In 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, American units faced brutal German counterattacks in the snow-covered forests of Belgium. One platoon of about 18 men was last seen holding a strategic road near the Ardennes. Reinforcements later arrived to find the road littered with destroyed equipment and frozen corpses. But the 18 men were not among them. Their weapons were left behind, their positions abandoned. Some believed they were captured and executed, their bodies hidden by retreating forces. Others whisper of desertion, men slipping away to survive in the chaos. But official records list them simply as missing. Not all vanishings were on the battlefield. Some soldiers disappeared even while in relative safety. In 1943, a British intelligence officer named Major Charles Howard boarded a supply plane headed for Cairo. The plane never made it. No wreckage was ever found. No distress calls were reported. What makes the story strange is that 2 other aircraft flying the same route arrived safely. Theories range from enemy interception to sabotage. Some even suggest Howard defected, taking with him crucial intelligence. To this day, his disappearance is considered one of the great unsolved mysteries of the war. The Pacific Ocean holds countless secrets as well. Naval warfare during World War II was brutal, and ships could sink in minutes, swallowing hundreds of men. But in some cases, survivors were reported, only to vanish afterward. In 1945, the USS Indianapolis was torpedoed after delivering parts of the atomic bomb. Around 900 men survived the sinking, left stranded in shark-infested waters. Over the course of days, many died of dehydration, exposure, or shark attacks. But when rescuers finally arrived, the numbers didn't add up. Dozens of men who had been seen alive days earlier were never recovered. Some may have drifted away, their bodies lost to the ocean. Others may have been taken by sharks. But for their families, the uncertainty remains a wound that never fully healed. Perhaps the most haunting vanishings are the personal ones, individual soldiers whose lives simply stopped being recorded. Letters stopped arriving. Their names were etched into monuments under "Missing in Action." One such case is that of Private Thomas Kelly, a 19-year-old from New Jersey. He fought in Normandy shortly after D-Day. His last letter to his mother spoke of the fear he felt, but also the determination to see the war through. Days later, during a firefight near Caen, he was separated from his unit. Witnesses saw him dive into a hedgerow under heavy fire. When the smoke cleared, he was gone. No body was ever found. To his family, he became another ghost of the war, his face preserved only in a fading photograph. The mystery of vanished soldiers continues to fascinate and disturb because it touches on our deepest human fears: to die without recognition, to be erased without explanation. War already takes away certainty, but these stories remind us that it can also erase the very record of existence. Historians estimate that nearly 3 million soldiers from all nations remain officially missing from World War II. Some are buried in unmarked graves across Europe and Asia. Some lie at the bottom of oceans. And some may still rest in remote jungles and mountains, their stories lost forever. Even today, efforts continue to recover these missing soldiers. Organizations like the DPAA, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, conduct missions to locate remains, identify them through DNA, and return them to families. Every time a set of remains is identified, a mystery is solved, and a family gains the closure they've waited decades for. Yet for every one soldier found, thousands remain unaccounted for. The vanished soldiers of World War II are not just statistics. They were sons, brothers, fathers, and friends. Their disappearances remind us that war is not only about victory or defeat. It is about the countless individual lives shattered, some of which remain mysteries to this day. The silence they left behind speaks louder than any history book. As the war dragged on, the number of missing grew so large that it began to haunt the governments themselves. Official records listed them as MIA, missing in action. But behind those 3 cold letters were thousands of families who could never sleep in peace. They lived in a state of endless waiting, clinging to rumors, half-truths, and faint hopes. For many, the war never truly ended, because someone they loved had vanished without a trace. One of the most haunting examples comes from the Japanese side. In 1945, as the empire crumbled, soldiers stationed in remote Pacific islands were cut off from communication. Some units were ordered to fight to the last man. Others were told to vanish into the jungle and never surrender. Many followed those orders so literally that decades later, explorers stumbled upon half-wild soldiers who still thought the war was going on. One of the most famous cases was Hiru Onoda, found in the Philippines in 1974, nearly 30 years after the war ended. He had survived all those years in hiding, convinced Japan was still fighting. If one soldier could vanish for 3 decades, how many others disappeared into silence, never to be found? But the most chilling mysteries are the ones where evidence suggests something darker. In Eastern Europe, testimonies emerged after the war of entire groups of prisoners being marched into forests, never to return. Villagers whispered of mass graves covered hastily with soil. Survivors spoke of soldiers being executed in secret, their bodies hidden to erase proof. Officially, those men are still listed as missing. Unofficially, they may rest beneath unmarked earth, their identities erased by the very brutality of war. Sometimes the vanishing was not just physical, but political. During Stalin's reign, Soviet soldiers accused of cowardice or desertion were often arrested by their own army and quietly disappeared. Families were never told the truth. To the state, admitting such executions would have been weakness. Instead, the men were recorded as missing in battle. In reality, They had been erased by the machinery of fear within their own ranks. The cruelty of such vanishings lies not only in death but in the silence that followed. Across the Atlantic, American soldiers too vanished under mysterious circumstances. One chilling story comes from France in 1944, when Allied forces liberated a small village. A squad of US soldiers celebrated their victory, resting in a local farmhouse. By morning, every soldier in that house was gone. Villagers said they heard trucks in the night, but no one dared to investigate. Their weapons and gear were found scattered inside, as if they had been taken suddenly and silently. German forces were far away at that time, making the disappearance even more inexplicable. Were they kidnapped by collaborators, executed by enemy sympathizers, or did something stranger happen that was deliberately covered up? Their files remain classified to this day, and then there is the ocean, the greatest graveyard of the war. Submarines slipped beneath the waves and never resurfaced, taking hundreds of men into the abyss. Airplanes vanished into stormy skies, leaving no wreckage behind. In 1943, Flight 19, a squadron of US Navy bombers, disappeared over the Atlantic. Search planes were sent, one of which also vanished. No trace of them was ever found. Though technically outside the main theaters of battle, this incident became a symbol of how quickly soldiers could vanish into nothingness, swallowed by a war that seemed to consume not only lives, but reality itself. What makes these stories so unsettling is not only the absence of answers, but the way they blur the line between truth and myth. When a soldier dies, his family grieves, but when a soldier vanishes, his family is trapped in a cycle of what-ifs. What if he survived? What if he is still alive somewhere waiting to return? What if the government knows more than they ever told us? These questions kept mothers awake at night, left children growing up with empty chairs at the dinner table, and turned the word missing into a lifelong wound. The climax of these vanishings is not just in the events themselves, but in the legacy they left behind. In some cases, remains have been discovered decades later, in unexpected places, deep in forests, inside caves, or washed up on distant shores. Each discovery brings both relief and pain. Relief because the mystery is finally solved, and pain because it confirms what families feared all along. But for every one mystery solved, hundreds remain unanswered. The most powerful moment comes when we realize that behind every vanished soldier is not just a statistic, but a story. A young man who wrote letters home promising to return. A father who kissed his children goodbye, believing he would see them again. A brother who joked with his comrades before marching into battle. These were not nameless shadows. They were flesh and blood filled with hope and fear. To imagine them erased from existence is to confront the deepest cruelty of war. That it does not only kill, it can erase memory itself. Perhaps that is why the stories of vanished soldiers continue to resonate today. They remind us that history is not neat and complete. It is filled with gaps, silences, and mysteries that may never be solved. But it also reminds us of the duty to remember, to ensure that even if their bodies are lost, their stories are not. As the decades pass, technology brings hope. DNA testing, satellite imagery, and underwater exploration have solved cases once thought impossible. Families who waited a lifetime are finally laying their loved ones to rest. Yet the haunting reality remains. Millions of soldiers from World War II will never be found. They are scattered across battlefields, oceans, jungles, and mountains. Some may lie just beneath the soil we walk on, their names waiting to be rediscovered. And so the climax of this story is not a resolution, it is a challenge. A challenge to remember the missing, to honor their silence, and to recognize that even when a soldier vanishes without a trace, his story still echoes through history. As we look back at the vanished soldiers of World War II, we are forced to confront a painful truth. The war never truly ended for millions of families. While nations celebrated victory, countless mothers, fathers, wives, and children were left with nothing but silence. They waited by doors that never opened. They read letters that ended mid-sentence. And they lived with the hope that one day a knock might come. The knock that never arrived. The official records are cold and clinical, missing in action. Just 3 words, typed on a piece of paper. But behind those words are broken lives. A telegram delivered by a nervous officer to a small farmhouse in Kansas. A mother clutching the paper so tightly her hands shake. A child asking when their father will be home, not understanding that the word missing means he may never come back. These stories happened not once, not twice, but millions of times across every nation involved in the war. And yet the disappeared are not forgotten. Each year, new discoveries remind us that their stories still matter. In Europe, construction workers sometimes unearth bones beneath old fields, a rusted helmet still resting nearby. In the Pacific, divers explore shipwrecks swallowed by coral and find the remains of men who vanished 80 years ago. Each discovery is not just about science, it is about restoring dignity, giving a name to the nameless, and bringing closure to families who carried the weight of absence for generations. There is something deeply haunting about disappearance. Death can be mourned, a grave can be visited, but vanishing leaves a wound that never closes. It leaves questions that echo louder with each passing year. Did he die in battle? Was he captured? Did he suffer? Could he still be alive somewhere, hiding in shadows, forgotten by the world? For families, the mind creates endless stories, because silence provides no answers. And in that silence, grief becomes eternal. The missing soldiers also remind us of the scale of human sacrifice. When we speak of 70 million dead in World War II, the number is too large to truly understand. But when we hear about one soldier, a young man with a name, a face, and a story, we begin to see the humanity hidden inside the statistics. The missing make us pause. They force us to imagine not only how they died, but how they lived. The letters they wrote, the jokes they shared with comrades, the dreams they had for after the war. These details bring history to life, and they remind us that behind every vanished name was a beating heart. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of all is that the missing never got to choose how they were remembered. A soldier who died bravely might be buried with honors, his story told in newspapers. But a soldier who disappeared is remembered in fragments. Families often invented their own narratives, believing their loved one was a hero who died saving others, or imagining he escaped and built a new life somewhere far away. In truth, the silence allowed myths and legends to grow, because in the absence of fact, hope fills the void. We cannot undo the past. We cannot bring back those who vanished, but we can choose how we remember them. We can choose to honor their sacrifice by telling their stories, by refusing to let them be erased. Each time we speak their names, each time we uncover their history, we bring them back into the light. That is why channels, books, and documentaries about World War II matter, not just for education, but for remembrance. In many ways, the vanished soldiers are symbols of the war itself. They embody the chaos, the destruction, and the unanswered questions that still linger. They remind us that war does not end neatly, with parades and treaties. It leaves shadows that stretch across decades. For the families of the missing, the war never ended. It simply became a lifetime of waiting. But there is also something profoundly human in the way we continue to search. Decades after the guns went silent, teams still comb battlefields, dive into oceans, and dig into archives, all to bring one soldier home at a time. Each identification is a victory against the silence of history. Each set of remains returned to a family is proof that memory outlasts war. It is proof that even when soldiers vanish without a trace, humanity refuses to forget. The vanished soldiers also leave us with a warning. They remind us of the cost of war, not just in lives lost, but in the way war erases identity, swallows truth, and leaves generations in grief. Their absence is not just a mystery, it is a lesson. It tells us that behind every uniform is a fragile human being who can be taken away in an instant, leaving behind nothing but questions. As this story closes, imagine the final moments of those who vanished. A soldier in Normandy running into the fog, never to be seen again. A sailor clinging to wreckage in the Pacific, disappearing beneath the waves. A young boy from Moscow, lost in the ruins of Stalingrad. Their names may not appear in textbooks, but their silence is louder than any history written. They are the ghosts of World War II, and they walk with us still. So the next time you see the word missing etched on a memorial wall, remember that it is not just a word. It is a story unfinished, a life interrupted, a family forever changed. It is a reminder that war does not only kill, it can erase. And yet, as long as we remember, they are not truly gone. Memory is their grave. Our voices are their monuments. The soldiers who vanished without a trace may never return. But their legacy is carved into history, not in stone, but in silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest reminder of all. World War II was not only a war of battles and victories, it was also a war of silence. Behind the roaring guns and marching armies were millions of soldiers who simply disappeared. No farewell, no final letter, no grave for loved ones to visit. They vanished into the ruins of Stalingrad, the dense jungles of the Pacific, the frozen forests of Europe, and the endless oceans that swallowed entire fleets. Their absence speaks louder than any victory parade. For their families, the war never truly ended. A telegram marked "missing in action" was more than just 3 words. It was a lifetime of waiting. Mothers kept the porch light burning, wives clung to the last letter, and children grew up searching every face in the crowd for a father who never returned. These disappearances remind us that war erases more than lives. It erases certainty, leaving behind silence that echoes across generations. And yet, even in their absence, these soldiers still speak. Their stories rise from unearthed helmets in forgotten fields, from shipwrecks discovered beneath coral, from dog tags clutched tightly in the soil. They remind us of the fragility of life and the brutality of war. Every missing soldier was once a son, a father, a brother, a friend. Their disappearance is not just a mystery, it is a scar on history, and scars tell stories we cannot afford to forget. By remembering them, by sharing their stories, we keep them alive. Their silence becomes a voice, carried through time by those who refuse to let them vanish again. History may have lost their names, but memory can still honor their sacrifice. If the silence of the vanished soldiers touched you, subscribe to WW2 Soldiers for more untold stories from the war. Every video helps keep their memories alive and ensures history's forgotten voices are heard. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment about the story that stayed with you most, because together we can turn silence into remembrance and ensure they are never erased from history.